Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the golden age of the symphony, 1970 to 79. As late as then, we were still in it, and we may still be today. Who knows? But this is the modern part, let's say the 20th century part of this series, because after this, we're going to go back 2 decades into the 19th century, because I believe that the golden age of the symphony, the period that we're talking, began around 1880 and ended around 1980. It's that century that we're doing, decade by decade. So we're going to go back after this. But here is the last bit in the 20th century that I have for you. And, there's some splendid symphonies here. Absolutely marvelous. First, Alan Pettersson, Symphony No. 9. Oh my goodness, yes. Well, we already did the 8th, and some people, including a Swedish person, suggested to me that the 7th is really the more important of the two. But I mean, really, who cares? The important thing is that he was writing them and that they exist. I like the 8th better, personally. I think it's spookier. But in any case, the 9th is also pretty harrowing. I mean, Pettersson tends to be. It spends most of its time, worrying over chromatic scales and then having some diatonic interludes. But it's a pretty horripilating piece of music, and it's endless fun. So there's that. Then that's 1971. Also in 1971, it was a good year actually. Aulis Sallinen, who was a young composer then, his Symphony No. 1 popped up. Sallinen went on to make his career writing opera in Finnish, The Horseman, The Red Line, The King Goes Forth to France, Kullervo, a whole bunch of operas and things like that. And some of them are just wonderful. Some of them are a little bit, I find, a little dry. But he did have quite a career. He's still alive as far as I know. He doesn't seem to be terribly active anymore, and he spent most of his career in Paris, I believe, after a certain time. But his symphonies are lovely, and he wrote 7 or 8 of them, worth getting to know. One of them is based on The Lord of the Rings. It's Gandalf Dances, I think, number 7 or so. But they are evocatively scored, and they subscribe to no particular formula or school of composition. They are really, really pretty special. And his first is very short. It's about 15 minutes long. It's a short little work. Delightful and worth getting to know. Then of the older school of Finnish composer, Jonas Kokkonen, whose 3rd symphony many of you mentioned as belonging to the previous decade or thereabouts. His 4th, I love his 4th symphony. It's in 3 movements, basically slow, fast, slow. The central scherzo is so much fun to listen to. It has this wonderful tune. Da, 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 da. It's very Sibelian. It assembles the theme gradually as it goes, rising to a huge climax at the end. Just absolutely unforgettable and great music. He was a tremendous composer. He also wrote a fantastic opera called The Last Temptations and some beautiful concerti, a requiem. A composer really, really worth hearing. So that was 1971. All 3 of these first 3 works were 1971. 1972, Shostakovich's 15th, the end of an era. Truly, truly the end of an era. What more could I say about it, except that, it's hard to think of a decade from the 1920s on in which Shostakovich wasn't a looming presence. One of the great geniuses in 20th century composition, and one of the great symphonists ever from any era, in any style. Also a composer who I've been pushing, and who some of you have actually approved of, the fact that I've been pushing, the American composer Peter Mennin. His Symphony No. 8 dates from 1973. It's an angry, turbulent work. Oh, it's so much fun to listen to. It is challenging, yes, it is, in terms of its idiom, but it is basically he's an American neoclassicist, and so the formal shapeliness is there. Those motoric rhythms that came about thanks to Stravinsky and his crew in the early decades of the 20th century. It's great music, and well worth getting to know. Then there's the Turkish composer Saygun, Ahmed Adnan Saygun. I think was his whole name. He's a really good composer. I first got to know him because of his gorgeous viola concerto. A lot of his music is quasi-atonal, but rich and exotic and lush and really fun to hear, and rhythmic and rugged. And oh gosh, he's a voice. He's a real voice. And his Fourth Symphony is a tremendously vibrant and exciting piece of music. I like composers who just take no prisoners, and he takes no prisoners. He really doesn't. He writes confidently for a large orchestra and lets it rip. So his Fourth Symphony is definitely worth getting to know. It's on CPO, and you can hear it. Then here's one of the great popular hits of the 1970s or 80s when it first was recorded on CD. Goretsky, Symphony No. 3, the Symphony of Sorrowful Songs. This has been recorded a number of times. Goretsky was a member of the Polish avant-garde who rediscovered tonality and minimalism, and he wrote this lovely, lovely symphony for strings and soprano. It was recorded by Nonsuch and sold millions of copies. It was anomalous. No one could quite figure out how it happened, but it did, and everybody was jealous, and people were snapping and criticizing him because he wrote something that was actually successful. God forbid someone should write something that's successful. But it was one of the greatest hits of the 1970s in the classical music world, and it still has a good reputation among listeners who care about contemporary music. It's a wonderful piece. After that, back to Finland. See, the Finnish composers really got going in the second half of the 20th century. After Sibelius passed away, in 1959, there was just an explosion of fine composers in Finland, largely because of the example of Sibelius, which just goes to show if you care about your cultural products, and if you design music education to support that, then what do you get? You get great music. It's not like a mystery. It actually is pretty straightforward. It's a function of education and opportunity and encouragement. And Finnish composers had it. Einar Englund was one of the really great Finnish symphonists after Sibelius. He actually did stop composing at some point in the 60s because the academic serialist avant-garde was crapping all over him for not being a member of that fraternity. His early symphonies are somewhat Shostakovich-like, but after that he made a big comeback in the 70s and 80s and developed a very personal, wonderful style. His first piano concerto is brilliant, and his Symphony No. 4, subtitled The Nostalgic, is for strings and percussion, and it has a movement called Tempus Fugit, Time Flies, where you hear all these clock sounds ticking and buzzing. Oh, it's just great. It's a beautiful, beautiful work that, everyone I know who's heard it has been dazzled by it, really. Then Giya Kancheli. Kancheli is a very interesting composer. He really is. He was one of those many composers from the former Soviet republics. And I met him, actually. I did an interview with him in New York. He was a very gracious person and very funny, because I remember he was a chain smoker, a terrible chain smoker. And I said to him, I wished him a nice trip home. He was leaving later that day, and he said, "Oh, it's going to be terrible. I can't smoke on the flight. I'm going to be climbing the walls." I felt sorry for him. His symphonies are quite lovely and mysterious, and generally big works, half an hour in single movements, that have very quiet episodes punctuated by just extraordinary outbursts of orchestral mayhem. Symphony No. 5 is in remembrance of my parents. Again, most of his symphonies have been recorded. They're accessible. And he's a voice that's really worth getting to know. He really is. And last but not least, this one will shock you. I absolutely guarantee. Howard Hanson. Yes, he was still alive in the 1970s. Believe it or not. He wrote the Romantic Symphony in 1929 or thereabouts. But in 1977, he wrote his seventh and last symphony, subtitled A Sea Symphony, using some of the same poetry that Vaughan Williams did in his Sea Symphony, also based on Walt Whitman, Leaves of Grass, that stuff. It's much shorter. It's about 20 minutes long, but it's a choral symphony that represents a certain summing up of Hansen's aesthetic, his tuneful, conservative, attractive music. And it just goes to show, and that's why I'm ending with him, that there was that kind of music being written all along for all of the trends, the atonal stuff, the avant-garde shtick that was happening, the music that the orchestras were playing, the composers in residence, all that god-awful music we sat through. Howard Hanson was there all along, patiently writing his music, ignored, but basically ridiculed for maintaining that style. But I wonder if he isn't having the last laugh. It goes to show that we should only care about the quality of the music, not the style, not the aesthetic trend of the day, because great music can be written in any style, and the best of it will be written in the composer's own, whatever style that happens to be. And so I bring this series of symphonies. We're going to be we're doing more. We're doing concertos, tone poems. Don't worry, there's more coming. Lots more in this century of the golden age of the orchestra. All kinds of music written for the glorious, fabulous, modern symphony orchestra. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me, and take care.